Sand was certainly a thorough mineral. Each grain found its way beneath wool and spellwork alike, insinuating itself into seams and folds with persistence. My robes, designed for drafty dungeons and northern winters, had become a private furnace. Heat pooled beneath the black wool, trapped and unyielding, while the desert air scraped my skin raw. I could not cool myself without violating entry protocol. I endured. Endurance, after all, was a language I spoke fluently. The Sphinx loomed above me, ancient and indifferent, its vast bulk casting a narrow blade of shadow from the curve of its headdress. That shadow would become the doorway, not an arch, not a threshold, but a precise absence of light that shifted by centimeters as the sun climbed. I stepped into it at exactly noon, boots sinking into hot sand, and recited the serial number I had been issued by the International Confederation of Wizards. 37 digits. No pauses, no corrections. Halfway through, the sand beneath my feet began to give way, not collapsing but accepting me, lowering me grain by grain as if I were being filed away. The descent was silent. There was no rush of air, no sensation of falling, just a pressing sense of sun-heated dust and claustrophobic tightness. The sand rose past my knees, my waist, my chest, swallowing and replacing it with pressure. When my boots finally touched stone, the sand slid away as efficiently as it had arrived, leaving me standing upright on a polished limestone floor. The air here was cool, unnaturally so, and carried the faint, mineral tang of old stone held under containment wards. Somewhere overhead, sand continued to fall, a soft, perpetual whisper. I stood in the middle of a waiting area that appeared to have been designed by someone who deeply mistrusted human joy. Ropes crisscrossed the space in rigid, meandering paths, forcing visitors into serpentine queues that led nowhere in particular. No one spoke. No one smiled. Faces were turned forward in expressions of patient resignation, eyes occasionally flicking to glowing placards that updated without explanation. The sound in the room was a composite hum, falling sand, warded air circulation, and something faintly reminiscent of Muggle fluorescent lighting buzzing just beyond irritation. To my left, carved directly from the limestone and fitted with gleaming brass fixtures, hung a portrait that had been tacked up slightly askew. It depicted a man of considerable confidence and immovable authority. He hardly moved within the portrait, his gaze fixed somewhere just above the viewer as if bored by their presence. The placard beneath it named him the appointed leader of the Egyptian magical government. The frame was ornate. The nail holding it was not. I took in the ropes, the silent cues, the portrait, and the oppressive calm, and understood at once that I had not arrived in a place of learning or shared knowledge. I had arrived in a place of process. I smoothed my robes, ignored the grit in my collar, and prepared to be ignored in return. I had, regrettably, studied Egyptian magical customs. Dumbledore had insisted upon it with the air of a man who had learned the hard way that Egypt did not reward improvisation. Their governance, he'd said, was a living thing, ancient, reactive, fond of stamps. One never requested access so much as submitted oneself to a process and waited to see what emerged intact. I had read the updates, memorized the revisions. I had not enjoyed a word of it. Resigned, I allowed myself to be absorbed into the queue. The ropes guided me forward in languid, humiliating increments, advancing only when the system decided I was permitted to advance. There were perhaps a dozen windows ahead, identical in size and design, yet only 2 were staffed. Each step forward was measured, deliberate, and unnecessary. Delay engineered. When I finally reached the desk, I understood immediately why the air around it felt sharper. An hourglass sat near the edge of the counter, small and elegant, its glass etched with sigils so fine they were almost invisible. Sand trickled steadily through it, grain by grain, the sound barely audible. Behind the desk stood a woman in a tailored linen suit, the color of pale stone, crisp and immaculate despite the desert above us. Her posture was flawless. Her expression was not unkind. It was far worse than that. It was professional. I produced the scroll Dumbledore had prepared, already completed, approved, and countersealed by 3 governing bodies with ornate declarations of approval. She took it without comment and scanned it with brisk efficiency. I had just begun to relax when the hourglass made a soft, crystalline sound and shattered. The sand did not fall. It lifted, swirling upward in a precise column before arranging itself into a glowing script above the desk.
As of 4 seconds ago, International Confederation of Wizards signatures must be embossed with gold leaf and countersigned by a Sphinx warden. Yours is merely silver pressed.
I stared at the words, then at the remains of the hourglass which was repairing itself for the next change in protocol. This document was approved.
Was. You may, however, file an emergency appeal, Form GH2F4.
She reached beneath the desk and produced a form with a practiced flick of her wrist. A second item followed. A thin pamphlet, its cover illustrated with a stylized sphinx smiling benevolently. The Sphinx and You, an Egyptian guide to navigating the art of time. I accepted both in silence. Along the wall, identical chairs awaited. I took one, smoothed the form across my knee, and began to write. The questions were precise, excessively so. When I finished, I rose, re-entered the queue, and allowed myself to be carried forward once more by the slow, grinding machinery of procedure. When I reached the desk again, there was no flicker of recognition, no shared acknowledgement of the 40 minutes I had just spent hunched over a redundant form. I was simply the next integer in her day. I placed the original scroll and the completed emergency appeal on the counter. The Sphinx pamphlet remained in my pocket, crumpled and undignified. She reviewed the documents with a rhythmic, mesmerizing efficiency. Her hand moved toward a heavy green stamp, the universal signal of progress, and for a fleeting, delusional second, I felt the phantom weight of success. Then the hourglass made its signature, crystalline snap. She paused, hand suspended. The sand rose, slower this time, as though reluctant.
It appears the Department of Antiquities has just reclassified the Hall of Records as a sentient historical site. You'll require a psychiatric evaluation from a certified Sphinx empath. The next available appointment is mid-July.
I said nothing. She reached beneath the desk again and produced another series of forms, thicker than the last, followed by a second identical Sphinx pamphlet.
Here is the application to seek approval to undergo the evaluation.
I felt the heat of the desert finally breach my composure. My fingers twitched toward my wand, not to curse her, but to vanish the desk, the cues, and the very concept of administration. I wanted to engage, to tear apart her logic with the same surgical precision I used on first-year essays. But her gaze was flat, immovable. She was not the enemy. She was the machine. And the machine did not care for my indignation. I took the new application and the second, insulting pamphlet. She watched, patient, unmoved. It occurred to me then, with reluctant clarity, that she was exceptionally good at her job. I retreated to the chair, not to obey, but to strategize. Reaching into my inner pocket, I withdrew a small, battered codex bound in dark leather. I had nearly left it behind, dismissing it as obsolete. A relic. I opened it now and began to read, scanning past statutes I knew by heart, past revisions and annotations, until I found what I was looking for. Old ink, older authority, an administrative weapon. When I approached the desk again, I did not offer Dumbledore's letter. I invoke the apothecary's sovereign right to audit. She looked up. Under the Treaty of 1761 between the Khedivate of Egypt and the Guild of European Potioneers, a master of potions is not classified as a visitor. I am a technical inspector, bound by ancient law to verify the integrity of all long-term stasis vessels within restricted archives. The room seemed to hold its breath. The hourglass did not move. For the first time she met my eyes fully, not assessing, not dismissing, measuring.
That statute has not been cited in...
Her gaze flicked to the codex in my hand. A pause. A recalculation. She reached for a fresh stack of parchment from below the counter and slid them toward me.
Well, in that case, I'll need your signatures here, here, and here. Liability waivers, consent forms, acknowledgements of temporal disorientation, and I'll escort you to the records personally.
I signed. She gathered the documents, rose, and gestured for me to follow. As she stepped away from the desk, I noticed that she did not reach for a new hourglass. That, more than anything else, told me I had won. She led me toward a heavy limestone door that bore no handle. She placed a hand against the stone, and the surface collapsed like a dune being lost to arid wind.
The stasis jars in the lower vault have been temperamental lately. It is fortunate we have a technical inspector with such a penchant for ancient history to oversee them.
She looked at me over her shoulder, a small, sharp smile playing at the corners of her mouth, the look of a person who had spent her life guarding a fortress and finally found someone who knew how to pick the lock.
Once your audit is complete, Professor, I believe my shift ends. There is a cafe in the Khan el Khalili that serves a hibiscus tea cold enough to crack stone. It is off book. No forms required.
I felt the ghost of a twitch at the corner of my own mouth. I adjusted my sleeves, the desert grit finally forgotten.